This story inspired a tremendous amount of outrage when Kipling attempted to have it published. When he submitted it for publication, he received numerous letters of rejection because the editors and authors of the magazines to which he submitted the story believed it to be morally objectionable and, in a sense, almost repugnant or repulsive. So one of the editors, Mr. Lang, said this is poisonous stuff which has left an extremely disagreeable impression on my mind. Mr. Sharp said, I strongly recommend that you burn this detestable piece of work. I would like to hazard a guess that the writer of this article in question is very young and that he'll die mad before he has reached 30. In reviews of this story, after it was published, one reviewer said that Mr. Kipling passes, as he occasionally does, the bounds of decorum and displays a love of the crudely horrible in its disgusting details, but the fascination of the story is incontestable. Another reviewer in The Spectator said this story may be curious, but it is also loathsome and shows Mr. Kipling at his very worst. What I'd like you to do is to take a look at these two discussion questions. Think about the story, start to analyze it, and the narrative that Kipling is weaving. Why do you think that these publishers and editors and reviewers reacted so violently against the text? What's so disturbing about it, especially perhaps to a British readership? Second, the tale's introduction provides us with descriptions of setting. How is India described and framed here? What does this introduction do to help to create a weird atmosphere? So, think about these two questions, pause the video for a little while and contemplate them, and then when you return, I'll take a look at that second question and provide you with some answers. Now, remember that the weird atmosphere is one of dread and terror, as of awed listening. That child sitting in bed, knowing that he can hear something scraping about in the closet or underneath his bed in the darkness. It's the sensation of awed listening as you strain to hear something out there. The weird setting here is established in the first few paragraphs and by the epigram. The epigram is not part of the story per se. It's not part of what Kipling has written. It's like a quotation that Kipling has taken that he thinks frames his story well. So he begins with this native proverb as the epigram. Your gods are my gods. Do you or I know which is stronger? Then the story begins proper. East of Suez, some hold, the direct control of providence ceases. Man being there handed over to the power of the gods and devils of Asia, and the Church of England's providence only exercising an occasional and modified supervision in the case of Englishmen. This theory accounts for some of the more unnecessary horrors of life in India. It may be stretched to explain my story. So what we have here is an initial description of setting that moves us from the familiar to the alien. It wrenches us out of our place of comfort and familiarity and moves us into this realm of unknown terrors. It is foreign and exotic and otherworldly to Kipling's audience because they view India in such terms. But there's a little bit more going on here. Kipling recognizes that traditional folklore and systems of mythology can become tapped out. Once they become familiar to you, they're no longer weird, because the very notion of the weird is an encounter with something that upsets or upends your knowledge and understanding of the way in which the world is supposed to work. Once you can categorize, define, and understand creatures or the supernatural, suddenly it's not terrifying anymore, or at least it's not weird. It's no more dangerous to you than a man with an axe. Because a vampire, oh, I understand how that works. Dracula, well, he can turn into mist, and he can turn into a bat, and he can't enter a house unless he's invited, and he gets killed by sunlight. Okay, I get it. I know how to deal with him. He's no more dangerous to me than, let's say, a bear. It's for this reason that in the Alien franchise, the first movie is horror, and the second movie is action. In the first movie, you encounter this bizarre alien with an unnatural gestational cycle that impregnates you through the throat and lays eggs in your chest that will burst out and then goes through this strange maturation process. So it's terrifying because we don't understand what's going to happen next. We have no idea how this creature is supposed to function. In the next movie, that one single alien from the first film is replaced by aliens. That's why the movie is entitled Aliens. There are hundreds of them, and it becomes an action movie wherein the heroes are grappling against a foe that can kill them. But the xenomorph, the alien from this movie, is no longer terrifying in the same way. It's terrifying in the way that an axe murderer would be, or in the way that a bear might be, or a wolf pack. They'll tear you apart. They'll kill you in the most horrifying way you can imagine. But I understand it. It's a human, visceral, physical fear. No longer weird. It's no longer unknown. In the same way, cultural traditions about witches and warlocks, magic spells, Satanism, or vampires, I understand how those things are supposed to work. They're part of my own cultural tradition. And so Kipling moves us out of that familiar realm of the supernatural, leveraging the power and the unknown mysteries of this new realm of India. Notice that we're moving into a realm that we don't understand. The physical realm has changed, but also the kind of spiritual realm. East of the Suez, some hold, once we leave our bastion of the known, sanity, life, civilization in England, in the European mind or the English mind, and we move into this strange, wild, unknown place, the direct control of providence ceases. It's as if God, our Christian God, controls things in England. But who's to say what happens in India? Suddenly you're turned over to new, alien, foreign powers, the gods and devils of this place that are unknown to us. And the Church of England's providence, the providence of the Christian God, only modifies. He doesn't control things. He doesn't have this command over fate, as it were. He doesn't orchestrate all things to his ends. No, now it's just this slight, occasional, modified supervision in the case of Englishmen, not in the case of the Indian people in the country, but just the Englishmen who are visiting it. The narrator here goes on to say that this theory accounts for some of the more unnecessary horrors of life in India. It may be stretched to explain my story. So the fact that we're transitioning into this new reservoir of mystery and exoticism in India helps to explain that. But notice what he says about more unnecessary horrors. There's a gradation of horrors here. If there are more unnecessary horrors, well, that implies there are less unnecessary horrors. But if there are unnecessary horrors, well, that implies there are also necessary horrors. So the Englishman who enters into India, bringing with him this colonialist mindset, recognizes that there are necessary horrors that must be accomplished and that are realities in this place because it's a place of savagery and mystery and exoticism. We might say, in his mind, that the horrors, the torture that he inflicts on the Silver Man later on in the story is one of these necessary horrors. What we have here is an example of one kind of weird setting, the alien, bizarre setting on Earth that is surrounded with these cultural presumptions regarding mysticism. The Englishmen of this era are looking towards India as a place that is unknown, that it's filled with its own strange kind of magic and different cultural beliefs. Kipling leverages those cultural presumptions and associations in order to borrow them for his story. He takes them and uses that setting and the presumptions that people have about that area of the world to help to create or help to establish this atmosphere of odd, unknown listening. H.P. Lovecraft. Now, what I've just described is the fundamental plague of the author of the weird. The more that you use an exotic setting, the more that you use something like a ghost or a demon in your stories, and the more that other people have used them, the less effective these things are at conveying the atmosphere and the feelings associated with the weird. Anything that we become used to, well, familiarity breeds contempt. Anything that we use to represent our fears, our spectral dread, or our existential terror quickly ceases to become weird because now it's familiar. We put a name to it, we categorize it, we understand it, we know how it's supposed to operate. Suddenly we have a new set of laws for that which shouldn't have them. So the genre of the weird always has to be adapting and changing, taking on new traditions or creating new things in order to maintain that same atmosphere of the unknown and the bizarre. In the introduction, we have laws being overturned. Remember that H.P. Lovecraft said that at the heart of the weird tale is this profound and most malign sensation of the human brain, that the laws of nature as we understand them are being overturned. Here, we don't have the laws of nature being overturned yet, but we have the laws of the operation of the universe according to the religious traditions of the British people being overturned. Now, the providence of God, of the Church of England, no longer applies. They're moving into an alien realm. And so it is a place of uncertainty where we're unmoored. We don't have sound, rational, or spiritual grounding. And so the setting that Kipling uses from the very outset, leveraging on all these issues of colonialism and European perspectives on India, helps to create that atmosphere of the weird. As we move on in some future videos, we're going to look at how Kipling characterizes the central figures in this story, and then how he goes on to actually comment on the status of colonialism and continues to use these issues surrounding colonialism and the fears behind it, the fears of miscegenation, genetic purity, or the compromising of genetic purity, or cultural contamination, as the crux of the weird nature of his story.